I was 3 time zones away when my sister emptied my grandmother's bakery account and signed over the lease in my name to cover her husband's debt. When I landed, she said, "It was just sitting there." I smiled. "What's funny?" she snapped. I said, "The account you emptied wasn't the one you think it was." And that's when the whole thing came apart. My name is Lorraine. I'm 32, and for most of my adult life, the most permanent address I had wasn't an apartment or a house. It was a corner booth in a small bakery on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, that smelled like brown butter and old wood, and the particular kind of quiet that only exists before 6 in the morning. My grandmother called it the best hour, the one before anyone needed anything from you. She opened the place in 1987 with $300, a borrowed stand mixer, and a stubbornness that the rest of our family inherited in smaller, more inconvenient doses. She named it after herself. Pearls. Simple. No tagline. No logo with a whisk in a cute font. Just Pearls. Hand-lettered on the window by sign painter she paid in cinnamon rolls for a month. I grew up in that bakery, not metaphorically. I did homework in the bad booth where she prepped dough. I learned to read by sounding out recipe cards. When she retired at 78, she didn't sell it or close it. She handed me the keys on a Tuesday like she was returning something I'd lent her. "You've been running it in your head since you were 9, she said. "Now run it for real." And I did. For 4 years. Not glamorously, not profitably at first, but steadily the way she taught me. I fixed the broken espresso machine myself. I hired 2 part-time staff and paid them fairly and on time. I got the bakery into a local food guide. I started a wholesale account with a coffee shop 2 blocks over. Pearls stopped being a memory and started being a business. My sister is 3 years older than me and has been in a slow emergency for as long as I can remember. Not her fault, entirely. She married young and picked someone whose confidence always outran his competence. Her husband, the one she calls visionary, has had 4 businesses in 8 years. A food truck, an app, a specialty candle brand, a real estate education platform that was mostly a podcast nobody listened to. Each one arrived with the same energy. This is the one. This changes everything. And ended with the same silence when the money ran out. My sister absorbed the losses quietly, and my parents called it supporting their journey. I was the other kind of daughter. The practical one. The one whose success was treated like a personality flaw. "You're so serious, Lorraine. You're so cautious. Don't you ever want to take a risk?" As if staying open, staying solvent, staying honest with your margins was somehow cowardly compared to losing other people's money with enthusiasm. The thing about being the reliable one in a family is that people stop seeing reliability as a virtue and start seeing it as an infinite resource. Like a well they didn't dig and don't maintain but fully expect to keep drawing from. I went to Portland for a bakery conference in October. 3 days. Seminars on supply chain, wholesale scaling, packaging for local retail. I'd been trying to get into 2 grocery accounts and needed the right contacts. I told everyone I was going. I made arrangements. I left detailed notes for my part-time manager. I was gone 72 hours. I found out on the plane home, not from my sister, from my bank. A transaction alert, a withdrawal. Not huge on its own, $2,000 from the business operating account. But I hadn't made it. I opened the app with my stomach already falling and saw 3 more. Over 4 days, $11,000 had moved out of Pearl's operating account in transfers that weren't mine. And then, below that, a notification I hadn't seen because my phone had been in Do Not Disturb during a seminar, a message from my landlord. "Lease reassignment paperwork received. Please confirm your intention to vacate by end of month." I read that sentence 4 times. My brain refused to process it as language. It just looked like shapes. I called my landlord from the jetway while people streamed past me with their rolling bags. He picked up on the second ring. "Lorraine," he said, and his voice had the specific, careful tone of someone who thinks they're about to get yelled at. "I assumed you knew. Your sister came in last week with the paperwork. Said it was a family restructuring. Said you were stepping back." Stepping back. I had not stepped back. I had been in Portland learning how to move forward. I didn't call my sister first. I called my accountant. She confirmed what I already suspected. The withdrawals were real, the authorization signatures were there, and one of them was close enough to my handwriting that whoever processed it didn't look closely. My accountant's voice was careful and even. "This is going to need a lawyer," she said. Not a strongly worded email. A lawyer. I called my sister from the parking garage at the airport because I needed the concrete walls around me. She picked up on the first ring, which told me she'd been waiting. "You're home," she said. Not a question. "Did you take money from Buzz?" I asked. A pause. Not shock. Not guilt. The pause of someone organizing their next sentence. "We needed a bridge," she said. "Marcus's investors came through, but the timing was off. We just needed to get to the closing. We're putting it back." We, as if I were included in that pronoun. "You sign my name," I said. "It's a family business, Lorraine." It had never been a family business. It had been my grandmother's business and then mine. My sister had never worked a shift, had never restocked the flour, had never sat with the quarterly numbers at midnight wondering if the wholesale rate was sustainable. "And the lease?" I said. Another pause, shorter this time. "Marcus found a space he wants. The location is better. It made sense. You can bake anywhere." There, it was, the sentence that made me understand, fully and finally, what I was dealing with. Not confusion, not a mistake. A decision made without me about my life, dressed up in the language of practicality. "You can bake anywhere," she said again, slower, like she was being patient with someone unreasonable. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I said, "I'll call you back," and I hung up because I needed to call someone who dealt in facts. I'd met my attorney through a small business association networking event 2 years earlier. She had the kind of focused attention that made you feel like the most important thing in the room, not because she was performing warmth, but because she was actually listening. I texted her at 9:30 at night. She responded in 11 minutes, sent me everything. Lease, bank records, incorporation docs, anything with your signature on it or that should have your signature on it. Don't talk to your sister until we've spoken. In her office the next morning, she went through the documents slowly. Not fast, slow. The way someone reads something they actually intend to understand. "There's something your sister missed," she said. My stomach dropped before she finished the sentence. "Pearls isn't just a sole proprietorship," she said. "Your grandmother transferred it with a specific business trust attached. She did it 5 years before she gave you the keys, probably before she told anyone she was planning to retire. The trust designates you as the sole operating trustee. It also stipulates that any lease agreements, financial accounts, or asset transfers require trustee authorization. Which means my signature," I said. "Your real signature," she said. "With notarization, for any transfer to be valid." She let that sit for a moment. "The withdrawal signatures are forgeries. Decent ones, but forgeries. And the lease reassignment," she tapped the page, "isn't valid. You didn't authorize it. Your sister doesn't have standing to reassign what she doesn't control. The trust isn't in her name. It was never in her name." I sat there looking at the document my grandmother had filed quietly, years ago, with a foresight I hadn't known to thank her for. She'd known something I hadn't. She'd known that the people who love you most carelessly are often the people closest to you. "They didn't just take money," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere behind me. "They tried to take the whole thing." My attorney nodded once. "And they didn't know what they were taking," she said, "which is both the problem and the solution." She filed a notice with the landlord within 24 hours. The lease reassignment was not valid, was not authorized by the trust, and any tenancy change based on that paperwork was legally void. She sent formal notice to the bank, flagging the withdrawals as unauthorized and initiating a fraud review. She sent a letter to my sister's husband's attorney, because of course he had one, he always had one, notifying them that any assets or funds received through this transaction were subject to recovery. My mother called that afternoon 14 times. I let it ring. My sister called twice. Both times I watched the screen until it stopped. My brother-in-law texted, "This is a misunderstanding. Marcus wants to talk." Marcus always wanted to talk. Talking was his primary business strategy. 2 days later, they showed up at my apartment, all three of them. My mother, my sister, my brother-in-law. My mother knocked like she lived there. I opened the door because I needed to see their faces when they understood what was coming. My mother walked in without being invited. Her eyes swept the room and landed on me with an expression that had always made me feel like I was presenting a problem. "You look tired," she said. "I've had a busy week," I said. "We need to sort this out like adults," my sister said from behind her. She was using her calm voice, the one she uses when she's trying to seem reasonable while being completely unreasonable. "You forged my signature," I said. My brother-in-law exhaled like I'd said something tedious. "Technically, your sister co-signed on behalf of..." "On behalf of what?" I said. "She has no standing. She's never been on the trust. She's never been on the account. She has no legal relationship to Pearls." He blinked. My mother looked at my sister. "What trust?" my sister said. "The one Grandma set up in 2018, I said. "The one your attorney should have found before you walked into my landlord's office." My sister's face went through several expressions in fast succession: confusion, then calculation, then something that looked almost like fear. "This is fixable," my brother-in-law said. His voice had dropped into the register he uses when he's pretending to be calm. "We can restructure. We can put your name on the new lease too. It's a better location, more foot traffic, more visibility. This is actually an upgrade for Pearls." "You consulted me on none of it," I said. "We needed to move fast," he said. "Investors don't wait." "My grandmother didn't wait either," I said. "She built something for 40 years and she was careful about every piece of it. She was careful in ways I didn't even know until this week." My sister stepped forward. Her eyes were wet, but not with the kind of tears that mean remorse. The kind that mean she was starting to realize this wasn't going to resolve the way she'd planned. "We're family," she said. "You're my sister. You can't let lawyers tear that apart." "I didn't hire a lawyer to tear anything apart," I said. "I hired one because someone forged my name." "We were going to tell you," my mother said, "after the closing, when it was done and working." After the closing, when it was done. The sentence landed like a stone in still water, and I felt the ripples moving through every memory I had of being told about things after they were done. After my sister borrowed my car without asking and returned it with a dent. After my mother donated the quilt my grandmother had made me to a church sale because it was taking up space in your old room. After decisions were made in my name because they were convenient for someone else and I was expected to absorb it. "I've been absorbing things for a long time," I said. Not loud, flat. "This time I'm not." My brother-in-law's voice went sharp. "The round closes in 12 days. If this isn't resolved, the investors pull out. Everything we've built falls apart." "I didn't build it," I said. "You're destroying my family," he said. "I'm protecting mine," I said, and I meant my grandmother. I meant Pearls. I meant the part of me that was tired of being a resource that people drew from without asking. My attorney had asked me to meet her at the bakery. Not for a confrontation, for documentation, for witnesses, for the formal handover of the corrected lease paperwork to my landlord with everyone present so nothing could be disputed later. The morning was cold and grey, that flat November light that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. My sister arrived with my mother. My brother-in-law came separately, with someone I didn't recognize who turned out to be his personal attorney, a detail that told me everything about how seriously he'd been taking this while performing casualness. My landlord was already there. He looked uncomfortable in the way of someone who deeply regrets being in the middle of something. My attorney handed me a folder, 1 page on top. My sister looked at the folder. "What is that?" "It's a collected notice to your landlord," my attorney said, addressing her directly. The lease reassignment you filed last week is not legally valid. The business trust attached to PERS requires sole trustee authorization for any lease modification, and that authorization was not obtained. The landlord has been formally advised that any tenancy change based on the prior paperwork is void. My brother-in-law's attorney leaned over and said something quiet in his ear. His face went still. Interior rights, my sister said suddenly. That's what this is about. It's about the trust, my attorney said, which controls operating rights, financial accounts, and lease authority, which belongs to your sister, which was never yours to transfer. My mother made a sound that was half laugh, half something uglier. This is a bakery, she said. You're acting like it's a corporation. It's a legal entity, my attorney said, with documentation that predates the sale attempt by 5 years. The forgery investigation is separate but proceeding. My brother-in-law said, forgery? Like it was a word in a foreign language? Like he had genuinely not categorized what had happened as forgery. His own attorney touched his arm. The stopwork had already been filed. The bank had already frozen the transferred amounts pending fraud review. The lease was already reinstated. None of that was reversible in a parking lot on a Tuesday morning. My sister looked at me. Her chin was shaking. You're really doing this, she said. It was already done, I said. I'm just catching up. If Marcus loses this round, she said, voice breaking into something sharp and high, that's on you. You understand that? If he can't close, it's because you chose a building over your own sister. I looked at her for a long moment. I loved her. That was the complicated part. I loved her, and she had walked into my landlord's office and signed my name and taken my money and told me I could bake anywhere. Both things were true at the same time, and neither one canceled the other out. I didn't choose a building, I said. I chose not to be stolen from. She turned away. My mother followed. My brother-in-law stood for another moment with his attorney, talking quietly with the look of someone adding up losses. My attorney said quietly beside me, You okay? Not yet, I said. But I was be. I went to my grandmother that afternoon. She lives in a senior apartment in Worthington now, 20 minutes north of Columbus. Small place, neat, with a window that gets good afternoon light. She'd been following the situation in the way elderly people follow crisis from their children, in fragments, through careful phone calls reconstructing the shape of it without needing every detail. I sat down at her kitchen table and told her about the trust. That I hadn't known, that it had saved everything. She poured us both coffee without answering for a minute, the way she used to do when she was thinking something through. I set it up because I knew, she said finally. Not your sister specifically, I just knew. When you love people and you have something worth protecting, you protect it quietly. You don't wait for the problem, you solve it before it happens. I put my hand over hers. Her knuckles were thick and warm, the hands of someone who'd made 10,000 pounds of dough over a lifetime. You solved it for me, I said, before I even knew there was a problem. She smiled at that. Small and satisfied, like a recipe that had turned out right. That's what grandmothers are for. The fraud review took 6 weeks. The bank recovered 8,000 of the 11,000. My sister paid back the remainder in installments quietly with a certified check every month and no conversation attached. My brother-in-law's round fell apart on its own. The timing issue he'd blamed on me turned out to be an investor who'd been looking for a reason to exit for months. That information came to me through my accountant, second-hand, without celebration. My mother and I didn't speak for 3 months. When we started again, it was careful and slow, like walking on a floor you're not sure will hold. We haven't talked about it directly. We talk around it, which is its own kind of answer. PERS is still open. The same location, the same corner booth, the same morning light. I got both grocery accounts after the conference. I hired a third part-time person in January. The espresso machine broke again in February, and I fixed it again because some things you just learn to do yourself. My grandmother's wooden recipe box sits on the counter where customers can see it. She gave it to me after everything settled, not as a symbol, just because she thought it was time. Inside, the cards are worn soft at the edges, the ink faded in some places, the handwriting unmistakably hers. I run my thumb over them sometimes when the morning is slow. There is no clean ending to a story like this. The people who take from you don't stop being your family, and love doesn't stop being complicated just because someone showed you its limits. My sister is still my sister. My mother is still my mother. Those facts sit in me like old injuries, healed enough to live with, but still there when the weather changes. What I know now, that I didn't know before, is that my grandmother understood something about protection that I'd never had to think about. That the people who count on you to absorb things will keep asking until you stop absorbing. That the moment you stop is not a betrayal. It's the first time you've been honest about what you're actually worth. Pearls is mine. It has always been mine. It will keep being mine for exactly as long as I decide to make it so. That Tuesday morning before the first customer came in, I stood in the empty bakery in the dark with the smell of the proofing dough and the sound of the radiator and the particular quality of quiet that only exists before 6 in the morning. The best hour, the one before anyone needs anything from you. I finally understood what she meant. The thing I keep coming back to is the recipe box. Not the court filing, not the bank statement. The wooden box my grandmother kept on the prep counter for 40 years. The one with the cards worn soft at the edges from how many times her hands had moved across them. She didn't hand it to me as a symbol. She just said it was time, but I think she knew exactly what she was doing. She had always known. That's the part that undoes me a little, even now. She set up that trust years before she gave me the keys, before anyone in my family knew she was thinking about retirement, before my sister's husband had started his second failed business or his third. She did it quietly, without announcement, because she understood something I was still in the process of learning, that protecting what you built is not a hostile act. It is the most honest thing you can do for the people who come after you. I spent a long time thinking that being good meant being available, that loyalty meant absorbing. My grandmother never believed that. She built pearls through 40 years of early mornings and honest margins and decisions she stood behind. She didn't build it to be a resource for whoever needed one. She built it to last. And then she made sure, legally and quietly, that it would. That's the kind of thinking I had to grow into. I was reactive where she was deliberate. I trusted the people closest to me to treat what was mine with the same care I gave it. That was not stupidity. It was a reasonable expectation between family members. But expectations and legal protections are different things, and my grandmother understood that distinction long before I did. She used her intelligence not just to bake well or run the business well, but to look ahead, to anticipate, to build something that couldn't be undone by someone else's urgency. And then there was what I had to find inside myself when it mattered. Standing in that parking lot with my sister in front of me, I felt everything at once. The love, the grief, the fury, the history of all the times I had absorbed and adjusted and made myself smaller. To keep the peace, I could have done it again. The old pull was there. She said, "We're family," and some part of me felt it. But I had already signed my name to something that morning. Not the legal documents. Those had been filed days earlier. I had made a decision about who I was and what I owed myself. That decision required something I hadn't always had. The willingness to hold the line even when it cost me something real. Not stubbornness. Not punishment. Just the refusal to pretend that what happened was acceptable because the person who did it shared my last name. My grandmother built pearls on 3 things that I understand differently now than I did before October. She built it on doing right by people, her customers, her staff, herself. She built it on thinking carefully, always about what she was protecting and why. And she built it on not quitting when it got hard, which it always did, which it always does. I'm still standing in the bakery she started. The same corner, the same morning light, the same smell of proofing dough before anyone needs anything from me. That's not luck. That's the inheritance she actually left me.